Today's daf we're going to be learning is Menachot daf Mem Tet. This week's learning is sponsored for the merit and safety of Haymanut Emunah Kasau, who was 9 years old when she disappeared from her home in Shabbat 2 years ago on the 16th of Adar 5784, that'll be February 25th, 2024, and whose whereabouts remain unknown. Today's daf is sponsored by Adam Plunka in honor of the yahrzeit of Moshe ben David or of Moshe Feinstein. And today's daf is sponsored by the Hadron Zoom learners as a zchut for the Jewish nation, our chayalim, and for the freedom of the Iranian people. May we safely and securely marry to v'na'afochu ad shishlatu hayudim hema b'sonehem. Wishing everyone safety, and we'll see what comes of this. Hopefully good things. I will apologize in advance if I'm not the most clear today. I'm trying to put the shiur together with the lack of sleep. Also, the previous shiur got interrupted 4 times, so I hope that we will not get interrupted, or maybe it was 3, I can't even keep track, but anyway, there were a lot of sirens in the last hours, so hopefully there's been a little bit of quiet. Hopefully it will continue, Be'ezrat Hashem. Okay, with that, we will get started. Tani Rabba Bar Chana Kamei de Rav. We're going to start with a braita that Rabba Bar Chana brings in front of Rav, which is not exactly clear what it's talking about. But Rav is going to completely disagree with the halacha in the braita, which Rav has a status of a Tana. He can disagree with the braita if he wants. So, right, most Amoraim are not allowed to. Rav can. Rav disagrees with this braita. We're then going to have 2 explanations. I'll just tell you the structure of the first part of today's daf. We're going to have 2 explanations of what exactly the case that Rav says what he says about, meaning what's the case really in this braita, because it's not exactly clear. We're going to have Rav Chisda and Raba. Then either Rabba himself or maybe Rabba, there's a problem with the Girsa, is going to bring a source, a Tanaitic source, to contradict what he himself said, and then he'll resolve it. Or someone else resolves it, actually. I think Abaye resolves it, I forget. Yeah, Abaye resolves it. And then Rabbi Zera is going to bring another difficulty on Rabba. So the 2 difficulties that are brought are going to be from Tanaitic sources against Rabba, but they'll be resolved. Okay? That's the structure of the first part until we get to the next Mishnah. I would say the more challenging part of today's daf is the first part. Second part is fairly straightforward and easier. Tani Rabba Bar Chana Kamei de Rav. So Rabba Bar Chana brings a braita in front of Rav. This was typical in the yeshivas, right? Somebody would bring a braita, say this is a braita. Kivsei atzeret sheshachatan l'shum elim. We have our 2 kivsei atzeret that are brought as communal shlamim, peace offerings, but they were slaughtered as if they were rams. Okay, what's the difference between a sheep and a ram? A sheep is the age is the only difference. Okay, as a sheep is a 1 year and the ram is 2 years old. So you could see why, now we're going to see. They were slaughtered as if they were a ram. Now what does that mean, they were slaughtered as if they were a ram? Well, on Shavuot, which is the holiday we're talking about, so again, remember, the sacrifice was designated from the beginning, this animal, to be for the kivsei atzeret, or 2 of them, let's say. And then the 2 of them were taken by the kohen and sacrificed as if they were rams, meaning they were sacrificed as korbanot olah, because you bring these korbanot olah on Shavuot made of rams. So this sounds like a classic case of a korban shelo lishma, because you took the kvasim. You thought they were elim, okay, or we don't know what you thought actually. We're not really sure. But you did them as if they were elim, really meaning you took a shlamim and you brought it as an olah. Back to the first mission in Zvachim. That's a classic case. They're kosher korbanot. You can continue after you slaughter them in the wrong name of the wrong korban. You continue to go ahead with it, but they didn't fulfill the obligation of the owner. Amar le Rav, alu va'alu. Rav says, what do you mean? Of course they were valid. They worked, not only can you sacrifice them, but they worked to fulfill the obligation. It's a little confusing. So Amar Rav Chisda. Rav Chisda says, Misdabri miltador. Now Rav Chisda and Rav are going to disagree about what exactly this case was. Okay, we don't really know what the case is, what the kohen thought, what he did, why he did it as if they were elim. Let's see. So Rav Chisda says, Misdabri miltador. It makes sense that Rav only said what he said in the following case. Because savor elim ushachatan l'shum kvasim. He actually says this isn't really a case of shelo lishma. What happened? They were designated as sheep. Then the kohen actually thought they were rams, but did it as if he thought he was doing a lo lishma, meaning he said, oh, they're rams, they should be olas, but I'm bringing them as shlamim. Okay? But now Tanakana's, the braita is going to say, this doesn't work, because it's shelo lishma, because in the end, well, he had some wrong intent here, because he thought they were rams, and then thought he was doing a shelo lishma, really. But Rav says this is fine. Why? Because in the end, who cares whether he thought they were rams or not? In the end, they were designated as sheep for the peace offering, and they were slaughtered as sheep for the peace offering. The fact that the kohen thought that they were rams and thought he was doing it with the wrong intent it's irrelevant. He actually, in the end, did the right thing. So we don't care what about his intent, which is interesting in general, because we said intent is so important. Now, intent isn't, in the end, he intended for the right korban. He tried to do something wrong, but ended up being right by accident. Because again, he thought they were rams. And he thought they were supposed to be an ola, and he brought it as shlamim. Okay? That's what he says he thinks Rav is talking about. But what would be the other case, which is kind of what we thought? Well, now he's going to say, we don't know what we thought. But now he's going to say, Aval kasavor elim ushachatan l'shum elim lo. But what if he made a mistake and thought they were rams and actually slaughtered them as rams? So if his mistake continued, meaning, so they were really meant for a shlamim, they were really sheep. He thought they were rams, slaughtered them as if they were rams as an ola, lo. For sure, Rav is not going to say that it worked for your kivsei atzeret. Why not? Akira b'te'ud havi akira. Now, we didn't really talk about this enough. We didn't really, or the Gemara didn't relate to this earlier when we talked about shelo lishma. Is the kohen doing the lo lishma on purpose or by accident? With this, what basically Rav Chisda is saying is, if he did it by accident, like really thought it was a ram, so he actually thought it was supposed to be an ola, sacrificed it as an ola, that's still ruining the sacrifice. Okay, it doesn't matter if it was on purpose, where the kohen said, I'm doing this lo lishma, or by accident. He got confused and thought it was a different animal. Okay, so that's Rav Chisda. Rav Chisda says in that case, that's definitely not what this braita is talking about, and it's definitely not what Rav said, oh, this would work, because it definitely wouldn't work. Because it doesn't matter whether it was by mistake or on purpose. It was a korban shelo lishma. So even though, now, this does look like the simple reading of the braita, he basically says it wasn't lishum elim, because it was lishum elim on purpose, for sure, Rav would never say that would work. And even if it was by accident, Rav wouldn't say that either, because even by accident, uprooting a shlamim and turning it into an ola is going to disqualify the offering. Again, what does it mean disqualify? It means you could still go ahead and bring the offering. It's not completely disqualified, but you're not going to fulfill your obligation. And Rav said you do fulfill your obligation. So Chis said that's not the case. Rabba disagrees. Rabba thinks that the case is even the case where you thought it was elim and you slaughtered it l'shum elim, and that's the simple reading. Sheshachatan l'shum elim. If you slaughtered it l'shem elim, Rav is going to say it's actually valid if it was by accident, because according to Rabba, and this is interesting in terms of the whole idea of lishma, doing something shelo lishma, if you do it for the sake of the wrong korban, it's only if the kohen did it intentionally for the sake of the wrong korban. If he made a mistake and he thought it was the wrong animal, he thought it was a different kind of animal and thought that this animal can't be brought as a shlamim, so he brought it as an ola, because he thought that's what it was. It was Shavuot. There were all these animals around. He got confused because, it's easy to confuse an animal that's a 1-year-old and a 2-year-old. So thought it was an ayil, slaughtered it as an ola, that's fine. He says that's actually, according to Rav, alu va'alu. That's the case here. Because it was by mistake. The only time lo lishma says you can't fulfill your obligation is if it was on purpose. If you did it by accident, no. Well, that's the opinion we're going to have to deal with and bring 2 difficulties on. So either Rava or Rabba himself brings the difficulty. It's a problem with the gear, so there's different opinions. Amar Rabba we'll go with. Rabba says, Umutvina nashmatim, but I can bring a difficulty on what I just said. Because it says in the Mishnah in Gittin, okay, which we learned Gittin, but we hadn't yet learned Zvachim then, okay? This appears actually in 2 other places in Shas, in Gittin and Nidarim, but it doesn't appear in Zvachim where you would have expected it to be. But we finally get to this source that we've been waiting for since the beginning of Zvachim, which is HaKohanim shepiglu b'mikdash mizidin chayavim. If a kohen caused a korban to be pigul, okay, if he did it on purpose, he has to pay, okay? He has to compensate the owner because it's not fair to the owner. The owner now has to bring a new korban, right? it's not his fault or her fault that the kohen messed up the korban. If the kohen has a pigul machshava on purpose, the kohen has to pay. Hashogigin. Now, what does it sound like from here? Only if the kohen did a pigul on purpose. If the kohen had a pigul machshava, then pturin, then you're going to be exempt. Okay, the kohen, if he accidentally messes up, the kohen doesn't have to compensate. And that's kind of like an insurance policy for kohenim. Okay, you make a mistake, you make a mistake. Now, but here's the important part, and we're going to see why this is so important. We don't yet know why this is difficulty. Tane'ala pigulam pigul. Now it says though, even if the kohen did it accidentally, the korban is still going to be pigul. In other words, pigul is going to happen whether it's by accident or on purpose. No matter what, it doesn't matter if the kohen had a pigul machshava on purpose or by accident. No matter what, it's pigul. It's just an issue whether the shogeg mazid is a factor in terms of the payment. Okay, now the payment is super interesting, and again, we talked about this in Zvachim, and I said eventually we're going to get there. I actually thought it was in Zvachim, I didn't remember, and when we finished Zvachim, I was thinking to myself, why didn't we get there yet? But it's here. I didn't remember, actually, there was a Mishna in Gittin, but it's important to remember for next cycle. But the main point is, the fact is it's pigul no matter what. Now the question is, Hechidami. Now we're going to do in this source and the next source, and actually when we get to the next sugya about the next Mishnah, we're going to do something similar, which is the structure here is going to be, well, what's the case? If it's this, we're going to do process of elimination. It can't be that, so it must be this, and then that's going to be a difficulty, and then we're going to say, no, we can really reinstate the first explanation. And this structure of sugya is going to repeat itself a few times today. So Hechidami, what's the case? What's the case where a kohen was mefagel a korban b'shgaga? Okay, that's what we want to know, where we're going to say it is pigul. If he knew it was a chatat, and yet he did a pigul machshava thinking it was a shlamim. Now, what does that mean in pigul? That sounds like a lo lishma. Okay, it's a little confusing because we're using pigul as an example of also to teach you lo lishma, but you'll see there's very similar, but it's pigul. If you have a chatat, you know it's a chatat, but then you slaughter it, let's say, as if it's a shlamim, meaning you have a thought you're going to eat it tomorrow, which you can't eat a chatat tomorrow. Remember, the time frame is different. So you think you're going to eat it tomorrow, and that becomes chutz lizmano, which is a pigul, machshava. But that, you can't call that shogegin. You knew it was a chatat. You then thought, I'm going to slaughter this and eat it tomorrow. That's for sure mazid, right? Hai shogegin, misidin havu. And we need to find a case of shogeg. So it can't be that case. Elalav, it must be the kasavor shlamim hu, v'kamachashe ba l'shum shlamim. You thought it was shlamim, and you had a thought that it was going to be l'shem shlamim. V'katane, in other words, now, v'katane pigulam pigul. Now, what happened here? You thought it was a shlamim, and you had a machshava. Just 1 second. Just blank it for 1 second on what this is. You had a thought that it was shlamim. I'm trying to remember what the mistake is. Oh, right. That's why I forgot. It was really a chatat. Okay, this is exactly like the previous case. The previous case was it was a shlamim, but you thought, right, it was a keves, it was a sheep. You thought it was a ram and slaughtered it as a ram. We want to find the comparable case here. So now we're going to say it was a chatat, but you thought it was a shlamim and you sacrificed it as a shlamim. That must be shogeg. And now what's important about this? Vikatani, what does it say there? The braita about this Mishnah explained. Pigulam pigul, this would be pigul. What do you see here? Alma akira b'te'ud havya akira. You uprooted this chatat into a shlamim. Right now, again, it was a pigul, but pigul lo lishma, it's all kind of similar in this way. And you basically uprooted it to a shlamim and you created what we call a chalud of pigul. If someone eats this meat now, they're going to get karet for it. So what do you see? If you did the same thing, lo lishma, right? All by mistake, because you just thought it was an ola, and you brought it as an ola, but it wasn't really, right? So we'd say, just like pigulam pigul, it would be lo lishma, and it would be disqualified. That goes completely against the way Rabba understood Rav, because Rav said, alu valu, this works, because it was all by mistake, and there's no akira by mistake. And if it was a kivsei atzeret, even though you thought it was an ayil, you brought it as an ayil, it's not. You actually sacrificed it properly, and we count it as a shlamim. This seems to indicate no way, no how. But like I said before, we're actually going to reinstate option 1, and that this case has nothing to do with our case, because it really is the first one that we rejected. Amar le Abaye. Abaye says, I'll answer this question for you. Lo'olam diyada de chatati. You knew it was a chatat. V'kamachashev le balashum shlamim. Now, what did we say? If you knew it was a chatat, and you did it as a shlamim, what did we say is going to happen? It's, right? That's not shkaga, that's intentional. What does Abaye say? Oh no, be'omer mutar. You thought it was okay to do this. Okay, someone didn't teach you in Kohen School 101 this basic law. You thought it was okay to do it, so you did it. Okay? So that's shkaga. Shkaga, right? It's always interesting, this omer mutar, right? You thought it was permitted to do that kind of thing, and that's why it's shogeg. Okay, so first difficulty is not a difficulty anymore because we resolved it. We said this has nothing to do with our case. Second difficulty. This time it's Rabbi Zera, Mativ Rabbi Zera. Now we're going to go back to the very beginning of our Masechet, on Daf Bet Amud Bet. If you remember, the first Mishnah in our Masechet, it's easy to remember because it's the same as the first Mishnah in Zvachim. And Imencha this Brach Shelo Lishma, right? What do we say? It's kosher, except for the unique exceptions, but Lo Alul Ba'alim L'Shem Chovah. But it doesn't work for the Ba'alim, right? They don't fulfill their obligation, they have to bring a new one. And that's where we get to the kohen, right? Is then responsible. Again, that's Lo Lishma, Pigel, but they're all one and the same. It's the way the kohen comes to the korban. But if you remember, we had this unique opinion of Rabbi Shimon, which we didn't have in Zvachim. We'll see why. Rabbi Shimon Omer, now I'll just warn you before we read this, the Gemara at first is going to understand Rabbi Shimon differently than we understood Rabbi Shimon then, and therefore they're going to say, it can't be this, it must be something else, right? Which is then going to raise our difficulty. And then we're going to say, no. This really, the first option is the way, and that's actually the way we understood it when we read it. So if you get a little confused because you say, that's not how we learned it, okay, maybe you'll remember, maybe you won't remember, but it's because at first the Gemara is going to understand this differently than we understood it originally. Rabbi Shimon Omer, Kol Menachot shenikmetzu shelo l'shman kshirot, v'alu l'ba'alim l'shem chovat. Rabbi Shimon says, any mincha that you did the kmitza with the wrong, right, the machshava for a different korban, it's kasher, and it actually fulfills your obligation. He has a different opinion than the Mishnah. You do fulfill your obligation. Why? She'ena menachot omot l'zvachim. He says, menachot are not like zvachim. She'kometz machvat l'shem cheshet, ma'aseh mochichim aleh she machvat. If you do a machvat l'shem cheshet, remember these are prepared differently. So when you do it l'shem cheshet, but then you actually bring it like a machvat, your actions show you really meant machvat and not marcheshet. Or chareva l'shum belula, or if you took a dry one, for the sake of a moist one, meaning one that has oil versus one that doesn't have oil. In the end, though, just because you had a thought you're going to do it with oil, but at the end you don't bring oil, so your actions show that it's not what you meant. But in Zvachim, if you do a shlamim and an ola, the three main actions, right, there was really four, but the three main, right, shchita, kabbalah, zrika, and also you could say holacha, carrying it to the altar, they're all the exact same action. It doesn't matter whether it's an ola or a shlamim or any korban. Okay. So now that's the source. Hey chidami, what's the case? So now we're going to try to figure out what are we talking about. Now we want to compare it to our case, right? We want to have where you knew something, you didn't know something else, we'll figure out what you did wrong. If you say de machvati v'kakametza l'shem cheshet, it was a machvat. You knew it was a machvat. You did the kmitza with a thought you're doing it l'shem cheshet. If you, okay, let's do it like this. You take a machvat korban. It was already, the mincha was designated as machvat. You say, I'm doing this kmitza right now, I'm doing it for marcheshet, and then you do a machvat. Of course that's disqualified. How could Rabbi Shimon say that works? Your intent was completely contradictory to what you did. So why would Ma'aseh Mochachim help you? You basically took a machvat and said, I'm doing this for a marcheshet. Of course that's wrong. That's lo lishma. What could be more lo lishma than that? And therefore it must be, the reason why Rabbi Shimon says this works, must be, and this is very similar to what we said about Rav, the reason he says it works must be there was some mistake along the way. Okay? And lalav de kasavor marchesheti, v'kakamitz la l'shum marcheshet. You thought it was a marcheshet, and you did the kmitza l'shum marcheshet. V'ta'ab, but the kohen made a mistake. Dahachahu de'maseh mochichim aleh, because then in the end his maasim will prove that he was wrong about it, that he made a mistake. Ha ba'alma, but what it now? And therefore, comes Rabbi Shimon and he says, that's why this is okay. Right, comes the Gemara and says, that's why Rabbi Shimon says this is okay. But now, what's important? It was bita'ut, and that's why Rabbi Shimon permits it. But what does Rabbi Shimon say? When it comes to sacrifices, which is what we're discussing, not minchas, even though we're in Menachot, our topic here is sacrifices, the kivsei atzeret. When it comes to the animal sacrifices, ha ba'alma, akira b'tu'ut havi akira. But the parallel case, remember what he says? In a mincha, this will work, but in an animal, this won't work. So what do you see here? Why won't it work? Well, it won't work, even though it was all by mistake. Because if we take the parallel, it'll be like there was an atzeret, kivsei atzeret. He thought it was a lim, he slaughtered them like a lim, right? Now, according to Raba, that works. But that doesn't work according to the way we just explained Rabbi Shimon. So Amalei Abai says, no, you're completely confused about that case. That's not the case, and that's not how we learned Rabbi Shimon way back when. He says, La'olam di yada de machvati. He knew it was a machvat. V'kakametz la l'shem chesed. And when he did the kmitza, he says, I'm doing this l'shem chesed, knowing it was a machvat. And then when he goes ahead and offers it, what does he do? He does it like a machvat, not like a mercheshet. Now, we said before, why did we reject this explanation? Because we said, well, what do your masim prove? Your masim, you did completely against what your machshava is. Machshava is super important. You went against your machshava, it should be disqualified. How could Rabbi Shimon say this is okay? So remember, Rava l'tamid amar Rava, machshava de lo minkara pasa rachmana, machshava de minkara lo pasa rachmana. Remember what we said about Rava. Rava said there that the way he explained Rabbi Shimon is, why does this work according to Rabbi Shimon? Because your machshava is so wrong that everyone knows that we don't take it seriously. Because your actions show that you didn't really mean what you said. You couldn't have meant, I'm doing this l'shem chesed, and then do it like a machvat. So remember we said when it's such a lie, right, your machshava, it just completely gets ignored. It's not a disqualifying machshava. Now that has nothing to do with our case, because we're trying to find a case where the person was completely confused. This is a case where it was actually done intentionally, but the machshava was so wrong that's why Rabbi Shimon says we just ignore it. Because when it's minkara milta, when it's noticeable that you did a wrong machshava, we just ignore it. We treat it as nothing. Again, the rabbis don't agree with that. That's why they disagree with Rabbi Shimon, but that's Rabbi Shimon's approach. So both of these sources that we brought, we tried to establish them in the same case that Rabba said was this braita, that Rav disagreed and said it all works. But in the end, neither of these sources really has anything to do with our case, and therefore none of them pose a difficulty. With that, we're moving on to the next Mishnah. Hatmidin ein ma'akvin tamusafim. So we're continuing on with the slew of ein ma'akvin. Okay, by the way, I didn't mention last week because I pre-recorded everything, but Alana Stein-Hainshir went up last week at the end of the week about ein ma'akvin and what this concept of this doesn't mess up that, and you can go delve more in depth into that idea because we're in a slew of them right now. The tmidim are not ma'akev the musafim, v'lo musafim ma'akvin tatmidim. Okay, we're going to have to understand the Gemara what this means exactly. But there's the things you need to know. There's korbanot tamid, which are the ones you bring every day in the morning and the evening. Then there's korbanot musafim, which is special holiday or Shabbat sacrifices. That's why we have tefillat mussaf, right? All the days we have tefillat mussaf. Also on Rosh Chodesh, there's extra sacrifices they would bring. So it sounds like they're saying, although we're going to have to see what this means exactly, if you didn't bring the tamid, you could still bring the mussaf. If you didn't bring the mussaf, you could still bring the tamid, or maybe order. It's not so clear what they mean. We're going to get back to this soon. And the musafim are not ma'akiv zeh. You have a slew of korbanot you have to bring often for the korban musaf. They're not, if you don't do all of them, right, you still, what they really seem to be saying is each is an individual mitzvah. The korban tamid is its own individual mitzvah versus the musaf. It's not like one is dependent on the other. Lo ekrivu keves baboker, yakrivu bein arbaim. Also the morning one, the afternoon one are two separate sacrifices. So if you didn't do the one in the morning, you could still do the one in the afternoon. Amar Rabbi Shimon ematai. Rabbi Shimon says, no, you can't. Only if bisman shayu anusimo shogegim, if you had no choice. If you either completely forgot for some reasonable reason, or you were anus, if there were sirens going off all morning and you couldn't, right? And you missed the time because there were constant sirens, but something like that. But ima yumazidim, but if you intentionally didn't bring the korban tamid in the morning, the lo yakrivu keves baboker, lo yakrivu bein arbaim. If you intentionally didn't bring the korban in the morning, you can't bring it in the afternoon. Obviously, we're not talking about a person. We're talking about the community. This is a communal offering. It's not an individual. Lo, it must mean the kohenim in charge didn't bring it on purpose. Lo akrivu k'toret baboker. Another thing they would bring twice a day is the incense. If you didn't do it in the morning, yaktiru ben arbaim. You could still do it in the afternoon one. Amar Rabbi Shimon, v'kulai takreva ben arbaim. He says the whole thing will be brought in the afternoon. If you didn't do it in the morning, you bring the whole amount. It was an amount that they would divide in half, do half in the morning, half in the evening. He says you bring all the incense in the evening then. Okay, evening, it's really afternoon. Okay, late in the day. She'ein mechanchim. Now, this word she'ein sounds like it's a continuation, but we're going to see that it's totally not connected. And the Gemara is going to try to figure out what's this doing here. Okay, and we're going to get into, tomorrow we'll see this. There's missing words because we're missing a transition. But let's just read it and we'll understand it tomorrow, which is, she'ein mechanchim et mizbach hazahav ele k'toret hasamim. You can't use the mizbach hazahav until you've put on the k'toret hasamim. Okay, if the mizbech hasn't been used yet, you have to get it ready for use by actually using incense. That doesn't really have anything to do with if you didn't bring it in the morning, you bring the whole thing in the afternoon. It's a little bit hard to understand. We'll get back to this. And not only we're going to now have a slew of things that you cannot use them until something has been done on them. It sounds like chinuch is when you use it for the first time. Okay, so you can't use the mizbach ha'olah, the regular mizbach, the one that was used all the time. Ella, the one that was outside the heichal, Ella b'tamid shel shachar. You have to the first time you use it has to be for the korban tamid of the morning. V'lo et hashulchan, Ella b'lechem hapanim b'Shabbat. You have to put on the lechem hapanim on Shabbat, specifically for the lechem hapanim, the first time the shulchan is used. And lo et hamenorah, Ella b'shivani ratea ben arbaim. And the menorah, it's actually in yesterday's parsha, was lit ben arbaim in the evening. And again, it would have to be lit, all 7 candles, for the first use in the evening. What we're going to do here is, we're now going to do something a little similar to before, but a little different. Last time it was 2 sources we brought because we had a difficulty on one of the opinions. This is going to be different. We're going to start with a question, and we're going to, not connected right now, we're going to try to answer it from 2 sources. One is our Mishnah, and one is a different source. And then it's going to depend on how we read that first few lines in the Mishnah. That was exactly what I said, that we don't really know how to read this line. And what they're going to do is exactly what we did before, which is first they're going to read it one way because a process of elimination can't be read that way, must mean this. And then they're going to reinstate the first opinion to say, no, that really doesn't answer the question because that's not what the source was talking about. And then we do the same thing with a different source. So, and that's going to be our whole sugya for today. Ba'amina Rabbi Chia bar Avin me Rav Chisda. So Rav Chia bar Avin asked Rav Chisda the following question: Sibur she'ein lahem tamidim u'musafim. What if you don't have enough animals for both the korban tamid and the korban mussaf? Which one do you bring? Okay, so before they even try to get to an answer, they say, well, what exactly are you talking about? Isn't the answer obvious? Hechidami, what's the case? If you're talking about we're on Shabbat and we need to do the korban tamid and we need to do the musafim and we don't have enough sheep, so what are you going to do? It's obvious what the answer is. Pshita tamidin adife tahavale tadir umekudash. Remember, we learned tadir always comes first, the one that's the most common. You do the tamid every day. You do the Shabbat once a week. So tamid is obviously going to come before the mussaf. What if you already did your korban tamid today, but if you bring the mussaf today with your sheep, you're not going to have sheep left over or lambs left over for tomorrow. Then what do? So do you save for the korban tamid for tomorrow? Or because it's today and you have the mussaf in front of you today, you do the mussaf? That's our question. Do we say tmidim adife shekain tadir? Do we say tmidim are optimal because they're the more common ones? O dilma musafim adife dahavale mekudash. Or maybe musafim are sanctified, right? That's like more holy because they're related to a holiday or Shabbat. They come first. So which is more important? Amarle Tanitua. Let's learn it from our Mishnah. He answers him. He says, right? Rav Chisda says, Hatzmidin ein ma'akvin et musafim v'lo musafim ma'akvin et tmidin v'lo musafim ma'akvin ze'etzeh. Now, hechidami, what's the case? Now, this we said we weren't really sure what the case is. So he's going to say, can't be the following, which is, if it means if you haven't yet brought the korban tamid in the morning, you could bring the mussaf first, okay? Well, hatanya minayin shelo yeh davar kodem letamid shel shachar. It says in a braita, how do you know that nothing comes before the tamid shel shachar? You have to do that first. How do you know that? It says in the pasuk, arach aleha ha'olah. You set it up on the altar. V'hamarava ha'olah olah rishona. Why does it say ha'olah, the olah? say, it's the first olah of the morning, meaning the olah that comes first has to be the korban tamid. So there's a drasha that says that one needs to come first, and therefore it can't be talking about order. That if you didn't do the tamid, you could do the mussaf first, and then later come back to the tamid, or let's say you did it out of order, you did the mussaf, you can later bring the tamid, and you don't have to redo the mussaf. Okay, maybe that's what it means. But it can't be, because it's obvious you can't do that. It can't be the Mishnah saying that, because that's not true. You have to bring the korban tamid first. So turning now to Amud Bet, Ela Pshita, must be obvious, lately. It must be talking about a case where you don't have enough animals for both. And what does it mean, this isn't ma'akev that, and this isn't ma'akev that? Okay, it means you can decide to bring the mussaf if you want. You can decide to bring the tamid if you want. Now, let's keep going, though, with this question. What are we talking about? Idi Yome, if we're talking about that day, meaning you don't have enough for the tamid and the mussaf of that day, amai. Why would we say they're not ma'akev ze'etzeh? Of course they are. What do we know? Tadir mekudash adif, right? Tadir is always going to precede mekudash. So you're obviously, if you only have one, you're obviously going to bring the korban tamid. So what must it be? And they're going to basically say, by process of elimination, we're going to assume the case is exactly with the question that Rav Chisda was being asked, which is elalav dilemachal. It must be that you have the tamid, you have only one sheep, you already brought the tamid today, you have one sheep left. Do you bring it today for the mussaf, or do you wait for tomorrow, leave it for tomorrow for the korban tamid? So it must be that. What does it say? Doesn't matter. Meaning, you can choose. They're equal. Okay? Tadir Mekudash, it's equal. You can choose whichever one you want. And that's your answer to the question. That's what Rav Chisda says. However, I already told you that we're going to reject this. Amar le Abaye. Lo olam di'id le'u lekadem. Abaye is going to reinstate the first explanation. It really means you have enough, and we're really talking about is the order. If you did them out of order, it doesn't matter. Okay, now wait. With the kakash yalach, didn't we just say shelo yehei davar kodem? Didn't we just say the ola, right? Nothing can come before the korban ola, the korban tamid of the morning. Well, mitzvah ba'almahu. That's the ideal. But if you didn't do it that way, it's okay. Okay, and that's what it's coming to teach you. If you did it out of order, it's fine, and that teaches us nothing at all about what if you only have one animal and you can't do for both. Okay, Tashma. Now we're going to bring a different source to try to answer the question, and we're going to do the same thing. We're going to say it must be talking about this, and then we're going to say, no, it's not at all. So, ein pochatim mishishat tlaim hamevukarim b'lishkat tlaim. Okay, there was a room where they kept all the sheep and the lambs for the daily sacrifices and for other sacrifices. You have to make sure there's always a minimum of 6 checked animals. What does it mean checked? Mevudakim? It means that they have no blemishes. So you have to make sure you always have 6 animals there ready to go. Okay, why 6? Well, because there's one day a year, or possibly one time a year, where you're going to need 6. Why? Well, kedei l'Shabbat u'l'shnei yamim tovim shel Rosh Hashanah. What if Rosh Hashanah comes out on Thursday, and then there's Friday, and then there's Shabbat? Now, in those days, they didn't do 2 days of Rosh Hashanah like we do, but they did them out of suffix, okay? They didn't know if Rosh Hashanah was going to be the first, right, be determined that's the new moon. So they would wait all day, basically. If the witnesses came in the morning, then they said, this is Rosh Hashanah. And then the next day wouldn't be. But if they came late, even if they came after Mincha, okay, and they did come and they said, well, today's Rosh Hashanah, once it was Mincha, they wouldn't bring the sacrifice until they found out, was it really Rosh Hashanah? And then if they came after Mincha, they made this takana because it was then too late to do everything, all the extra mussafs. So they said, if they come after Mincha, we're going to just make it the next day. And obviously, if they didn't come at all the first day, they would say it's the next day. But both days were days that are asr b'malacha. Okay, they couldn't do work because maybe the first day is Rosh Hashanah, maybe the second day. Again, there were years where the first day would be and the second day would be fine. But since there is this scenario where you'll end up with Thursday, Friday, and then Shabbos, all Chag, Shabbat days, and you're not going to be able to go looking for sheep and collecting them and checking them and all that. So since there's one day a year where you're going to need one time a year, possibly that, right, not even every year, where you might need for 3 days straight, you have to have 6 always. Okay, now this is a little bit weird, and we'll get to this later a little bit more, but why this is. But right now, just to explain it like this, since there's one time a year where you might need 6, we basically require all year for you always have 6 in waiting. Okay, we're going to do again what we keep doing all day today. Hechidami, what's the case of this source? Ilema de itle, if you have enough animals for all the sacrifices. Now you have to understand, If it's just the korban tamid, so you need 6, 2 for Thursday, 2 for Friday, 2 for Shabbat. If it's the korbanot for Rosh Hashanah and Shabbat, okay, if you're going to count them, I think altogether it comes out to 22 sheep you're going to need for all those days, for all the sacrifices, because it's all these sacrifices you bring with a lot of sheep. So, if you have enough animals, tmidim musafim tuva, you're going to need 22 for those 3 days and not 6. So that doesn't make any sense to say it's a case, right? Then you would need to store up way more than 6. Elalav delately, it must mean, and this is exactly going to answer our question, you don't have enough for the tmidim and the musafim. Ushma mina, tmidim adife. What do you see from here? The tmidim take precedence. Now, I just want you to catch here. If you say on Thursday, don't do the mussaf of Rosh Hashanah because you're going to need the animal for tomorrow for the tamid, then that's an answer to our case. Because tomorrow, on Friday, you won't have a tamid. So you're going to basically, this is a classic case where there's a conflict. You have fasim you're going to need for the next day, and you have to basically not do the mussaf because of the tamid, and that would answer his question perfectly. But as I already warned you, we're going to now say, no, that's not what it's talking about. Lo olam de'ile. No, this is talking about what you have. So why is it only mentioning 6 out of all the 22? Hachi ka'amr. This is what they're saying. Ein p'chatim mishishat tla'im hamevukharim b'lishkat tla'im 4 yamim kodem shrita umane ben bagbaghi. This relates to a completely different halacha, which is only relevant to korban tamid. This isn't relating at all to the mussaf. There's a special halacha for the korbanot tamid that you have to set aside animals 4 days before slaughtering that are already checked. They have no blemishes. Where are we going to get this from? We'll see in a minute. But that's basically what it's talking about. It has nothing to do with the mussaf, which basically doesn't answer our question at all then. We were trying to find where there's a conflict between you don't have enough and which one do you use it for. Do you save it for tomorrow for the tamid, or do you use it for the mussaf today? They basically say this has nothing to do with that at all. This is talking about a unique halacha for the korbanot tamid. And because of this halacha, the korbanot tamid, that you have to have 4 animals checked. Okay, you have to have sheep or lambs that are checked and already you know they're not blemished 4 days before. So how many do you need? You always need 6. You always need 6 checked from blemishes, okay, that are ready 4 days before they're going to be slaughtered. And that number is based on the Shabbat and Rosh Hashanah because, right, normally you'd say you just need 2 for whatever day it is, but there's days where you're not going to be able to take care of all that because it's Chag, so you have to do 6 in advance. Okay, now who is this? According to Ben Bagbag, Detanya Ben Bagbag Omer. Minay l'tamid she'te'um bikor 4 yamim kodem shchita. How do you know the korban tamid needs checking 4 days before slaughtering? Talmud lomar tishmeru lahakrivli b'moado. We're in Bamidbar, chapter 28, where it talks about the korban tamid, and it says, "Et korbani lachmi, for my korban, my daily korban," God says, command the Jewish people, tishmeru, I'm skipping a few words, tishmeru lahakrivli b'moado. Observe, okay, the word tishmeru, pay attention to that word, to sacrifice in its time. Now, lahalanu omer, in a different pasuk, which relates to Pesach, it says, on the 10th of Nisan, the Jews were commanded, take aside the animal, the sef or the korban, v'hayalachem lemishmeret Adar 14 yom, and it should be lemishmeret, the same root. It should be protected, right, saved for till the 14th, which is 4 days later. So when it came to the korban Pesach, it needed observing 4 days before. Also for the korban tamid, not for any other korban, just the korban tamid. And this halacha, again, has nothing to do with the question that Rav Chisda was asked. All it has to do with is this unique halacha of 4 days before shechita. You have to have the animals ready. How many? Well, you would have thought maybe 2, right? 4 days before they're needed to be used. Now they say always have 6, because there are some times a year where you're going to need 6. So now comes the smart aleck, Ravina. Ravina says to Rav Ashi, Hani Shisha Shiva Ahave. What do you mean? If you're saying for that one time a year where you're going to need this, well, you need 7. Why? Da'ika tzafra ditlata. Okay, it's actually a mistake, tlata. It should be cha b'shabta. Okay, let's think about it. When you're at Motzei, okay, we just had Motzei Shabbat. It's Sunday morning. Okay, let's say today, Sunday morning. you get to the temple after the 3 days of holiday, so you had your 6 animals, but where's your animal for this morning? You don't have time to start going to get an animal. You have to do it first thing in the morning. So if you're saying that there's a time of year where you need 6, you actually need 7 because you need for the next day. Okay, so comes Rav Ashi with a counter question. According to you, it should even be 8 because you need for Wednesday afternoon, right? Afternoon, just before Chag, right? You do it late in the day, so you're going to need 8, the one before and the one after. There's the, right, just before the Chag comes in, you're going to need it. Or Shabbat, if it's, let's say, Shabbat, Sunday, Monday. Okay. Lo adu rosh, okay, Rosh Hashanah can't come out on Sunday, that's why I gave the example of that, but maybe this is before that. Anyway, halo kashya, dilibatar da akriv kamra, he says, no. Don't ask me your counter question, Rabina says, because I'm talking about after you already sacrificed it. In other words, after Wednesday's sacrifice is finished in the afternoon, you need to have 6. Okay? But then, Rabina's back to his question. You really need 7? Okay, mikomakom shiva ahavu, he says, right? It's going to be 7 anyway. I'm just going a little bit more to just finish this line. Ela tana ba'al makai, and this actually, I wanted to continue because the whole thing doesn't make any sense. Why? Okay, we're in Adar right now. Why in Chodesh Adar do I need 6 at all times? Because of what's going to happen come Rosh Hashanah? So they say, no, tana ba'al makai. He was just saying 6. He just gave a number, 6. Umay kedei l'Shabbat u'shnei yamim tovim shel Rosh Hashanah simana ba'alma. He said this Shabbat and 2 days of Rosh Hashanah was just a mnemonic. It was just a way to remember. How do you remember the number 6? Because there's 3 days in a row where you would need 6. So it was just a mnemonic, and that's why don't take it so seriously and say you really need 7. And that explains it much better. Why anytime if you're going to need 6, it's just a number they determined. You need 6. That was the number they wanted to have in spare, right? We always have, if you have a budget, right, you want to always make sure you have X amount spare. It's the same kind of idea that, that you can always just in case. So they always wanted to have 6. And the way to remember it was to say Shabbat and 2 days of Rosh Hashanah, and people remember 6. Okay, and then that solves Ravina's question. Okay, we'll finish with that. I'll just review what we did. Okay, it wasn't the simplest stuff, but the end was a little simpler. The beginning was a little more complicated, but simply in terms of the structure, we had basically 2 sugyot today. One was this braita that Rabbi Bar Chana brought in front of Rav, and Rav disagreed with it, and then it wasn't clear what the case was. We had a disagreement between Rav Chisda and Raba, which really broke down to, is Akira Ta'ud Akira? Does it really uproot the korban, and then you're not going to fulfill your obligation? And then that was Rav Chisda who said that's not the case Rav was talking about, and Rav said, no, it is the case Rav was talking about, because Akira by mistake is actually not Akira. If you really thought they were rams, and you brought them as rams, but they were really Kibsei Atzeret, they're actually, you did the right, the korban was accepted. Just a little bit radical. 2 questions against Rabbah. Every time we thought the source couldn't be talking about something else, it must be talking about this. In the end, we rejected and said, no, it wasn't talking about this, and therefore you can't learn, it wasn't a difficulty at all. Then we went to this new Mishnah, which again was a little bit confusing, what it means that tamidin are not makvin the mussafim, which once we had this question that Rabbi Chia bar Avin asked Rav Chisda, what if you have not enough animals, just one for today's mussaf or one for tomorrow's tamid, what do? We thought we had an answer from our Mishnah. We thought maybe that was the case our Mishnah was talking about. In the end, we said that's not what our Mishnah was talking about. Our Mishnah was talking about the order of it is a makiv, not what if you don't have enough animals, which one do you bring, right? That you could bring either which one. That's not what it was talking about. And then we went to a second option about the shishat tlaim, which we also thought maybe related to the question that Rabbi Chia asked, Rabbi Chia bar Avin asked Rav Chisda. In the end, we said no, it wasn't talking about that either. It wasn't talking about a scenario where we don't have enough animals for both, which is what we were looking for. In the end, it was just talking about this unique halacha by sheep and how many you need to have, always checked beforehand, 4 days before slaughtering, and the answer is 6. And it wasn't really learned from Shabbat and Rosh Hashanah. In the end, we say it was just that was a mnemonic to remember 6. With that, we finish for today. Wishing everyone a good day, a safe day, and may we hear a B'Sol Tovot.